James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. We have some Bibles in the back if you didn't bring yours, but you can also find the passage on the screen. So the passage says, "Come now, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a town and spend a year there doing business and making money.' Excuse me. Yet you do not even know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, 'If the Lord wishes, we will live and do this or that.' As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Anyone then who knows the right thing to do and fails to do it commits sin." That's the word of God for the people of God. So 2 weeks ago, I was with you, and we were still part of our Finishing Strong sermon series, and we dug a little deeper into the Gospel of Matthew and also Isaiah. Excuse me, but immediately following the service, I went to the airport, and I was going to see my college roommate and also two of my sorority sisters. So when I got there and all of us had boarded the plane, you know the drill. So the stewardess came to the center aisles, and they began to do these hand motions that we all know. And so she began describing the protocol of what we were to do in case there was an emergency. Now, you think all of us would listen to that because she's giving us the directions that could save our life in the event that we crash. But what I saw, my observation, is that most of us were just in different stages of shoving our oversized bag into the undersized bin, or even worse, kicking our bag to see if it would fit in the little your foot space in front of you. But so we all did that, and then the stewardess says, "Now be sure and buckle up." And so that's what I'm going to tell you today. I want you to buckle up, because what James is telling us is instructions on how to navigate life to get to our final destination. So let's start with a little background. So James is the half-brother of Jesus, and he didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Think about your own brother. I don't fault him, My brother thought he was the Messiah also, and I didn't believe him. So he was the half-brother of Jesus, and he didn't believe until Jesus had been resurrected. And he appeared to James. And with that, James went on to become the leader of the Jerusalem church and also the Jerusalem council. And so that's why if you read, sometimes you'll see he's called James the Just. He also was a man of great wisdom and discernment. And so his letter, his epistle, reads very differently. And so it has these wisdoms and these, and so many times this book of James is called the Proverbs of the New Testament. Also, Paul knew him, admired him, and listened to him. Now, James's style, as you saw, is sharp and it's straightforward. And in our passage, he doesn't sugarcoat the brevity of our life. In fact, he says life is fragile and short, and then he begins to describe it that it's a mist of vapor, like lighting a match and trying to watch it, and the poof, and then your life is over. So that is your feel-good moment for this Sunday morning, folks. But as I was taking this trip, I was thinking about this passage, and here's some things that came to me that I think James is saying. First of all, the first slide says that we got to seek God's will in every area of our life. Now, I was boarding the plane, and I passed by the pilot, and just from experience, I know that the pilot, he has knowledge of the flight plan. He created the flight plan. He also has probably some working knowledge of the mechanics, the operation of the aircraft, and he also knows the timing, when we will depart and when we will arrive. Now, here's what I knew. I knew that I was going to the beach. I'd packed my beach clothes. I was going to be there in 3 hours. I was going to stay 3 days. I was going to get a tan. I was going to shop like a mad woman because the shopping in Vero Beach is incredible. And then I was going to come home with sand in my luggage. Now, if I had consulted the pilot, I would have known that we would have had a 2-hour delay, that the forecast for Vero Beach was rainy and cloudy all week long, and that the shops were closed because it's the off season. So the plan didn't execute the way that I thought it would. And neither does our life. Maybe you're like me, because I like to live in the definite. I make a plan and I work the plan. I see you list makers nodding. You're the planners. We're the ones that keep all those artsy people on task, right? So, but really, I'm flexible, but let me tell you what I mean by when I'm flexible. I have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C. And so see how flexible I am. But you see, this isn't what James is telling us. Have you heard that colloquialism? Well, if the good Lord's willing. My grandmother used to say that all the time. And I never really knew what she meant by saying it, but as I've gotten older and looking back, I see that my grandmother was modeling her relationship with God. My grandmom lived through World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. So she knew a little bit about pivoting. She knew that how life can change. And so when we say, Lord willing, it's not an affirmation, but it's a posture of our heart. It's planning with humility. Because when we look at our plans with an arrogance of control, then we simply decide that we're going to do what we want to do, when we want to do it, how we want to do it. Now think about 3 years ago. You were not sitting here. You were outside in a lawn chair, distanced lawn chair, and you were greeting one another at the passing of the peace with big old air hugs, right? And so COVID taught us how fragile life can be. It taught us exactly what James is speaking of when he says that our life is a vapor. Now, James isn't using this as a mantra or a tagline. He's not saying that we are not to make plans, or we are not to sit in our most comfortable chair and just say, you know what will be, will be. But God is our guiding principle in every circumstance. And so we are to make plans and then to give those plans back to God. And then we follow where God leads. And we do that, and we find, when we give our plans back to God, there really is a sense of freedom. Have you ever been in a crisis and everyone's head snapped towards you, and you thought, oh no, I'm the one that's going to have to lead us out of there. And then there's this voice from the crowd that says, you know what? I've been through this. I'll take the lead. And then you think, thank you, Lord Jesus. Thank you. There's a freedom. There's a relief. And that's exactly what God is telling us. And we find God's plan through Scripture, through prayer, and through the person of Jesus Christ. Now, it's important for a little more background to understand who James is writing this. And he's writing this epistle to two different groups. And one was a group of folks that were in mercantile, that traveled and sold things maybe, and also to laborers, to the working class. In this time in the Roman Empire, there really was not a significant middle class. So what that means is that if you had enough money to travel around and you knew where your next meal was coming from, then you were considered wealthy. If you were a laborer, maybe like a fisherman, and you caught something, then your family would eat. But if not, your family only had bread. So James addresses this idea of wealth. And he says that when there is wealth, there is a propensity to think that we are independent, that the temptation and the pitfall is to become self-reliant or to believe that we have all the authority and the autonomy. And our culture feeds on this, that we are told to compete, to compare, and to strive to be on top. Maybe even this week, we've heard words that speak to this well. You look like $1 million. Or, if you can't buy happiness, money can't buy happiness, but you can rent it. So we have these sayings that get stuck in our head. But James brings us back to the reality that God is sovereign. And he tells us what is of eternal value. Now, he is not saying business is bad. He is not saying that to make a profit is bad. He's saying that the essence is when we approach that with humility. A humble person knows that what they have was given by God and it belongs to God. When we seek God's will in all of our plans, then we can have the confidence that God's perspective is all-knowing. His presence is assured, and his timing is perfect. Which leads us to the second point that I think James makes, and that is we are to surrender our plans, our control, and be ready to modify our directions. Now, remember my flight destination to Vero Beach? Well, that plan did not change, but the course we took did, because the pilot came on the intercom and said, it looks like we have a storm ahead, and there's going to be some strong winds and maybe even some turbulence. And then he asked us in the cabin to make some adjustments so that for our own safety. Now, we didn't abandon the flight plan. We simply made some changes in the course. And, that helped me understand that when we release our death grip on control, that there is freedom in that. And when we find that freedom, we find purpose because we are aligning ourselves with God. How many times have I'm talking about myself, I will make a plan and then I will invite God to join me in my plan. And I think, I've invited God into my plans. I think I have it all backwards. Isn't the idea is to seek God's will and God's plan and then to join him in what he's doing? Science even backs this up. Studies have shown that adaptability has become critical in our life, in our home life, our work life, in our even in just our social life. That adaptability opens up our minds to new ideas. The comedian and the psychologist Guy Winch said this: one fact that we can't deny is that our happiness, satisfaction, and ability to build quality relationships and accomplish our goals is largely dependent on our adaptability skill. Now, you and I can think of countless examples of people that have made a plan, had a goal, had a bucket list, and then life happened. And all of that went away. I understand that, and you understand that. But if we're looking for an example, we don't need to search any farther than Jesus. Jesus was a man that was fully divine, and he loved us so much that he became fully human. And he did that so that we might know the Father, his character, his nature, his goodness, and his love for us. Jesus took 12 ordinary men, and by ordinary I mean unimportant, uneducated, accomplished. Because he wasn't interested in what they could give to him, but he trained them up to be men of faith and conviction. And that's why we're here. They changed the world. And you know, I find great comfort in that even Jesus asked for a different plan. Remember when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane? And he said, if this cup of suffering can be passed over. But then he followed it up. He said, but Father, your will, not mine, be done. There is no greater surrender than what Jesus has done for us to set us free. And each week, we say these words, we just said them. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. So, you know, it reminds me of that last beatitude. Blessed are those that know God is God and stop applying for his position. We got to stop applying for the position. So the last thing that I think that James tells us is that we are to live and act in that truth. James says, then he who knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, then he commits sin. You know, I arrived in Vero Beach and met my roommates and two of my other sorority sisters. And but what I haven't told you is that this trip came with a purpose. One of my friends is fighting stage 4 cancer. She did not want to talk about cancer. She also found out 8 weeks after she was diagnosed that her husband had pancreatic cancer. Now, I've loved these 3 girls since I was 18 years old. But as we have grown older now, our view of eternity is very different. One of my friends believes in incarnation. The other one sort of has a PRN relationship with God, you know, as needed. And then the other one just believes in a higher power of nature. And then there's me. So I prayed that God would show me a way to comfort and care for this sister. I prayed for an open door and an open heart. You know, often God reveals himself or gives me a word in the night. And I think it's because he can't get my attention during the day. And so on the second night that I was there, I had this vivid image of laying hands on my sister with cancer. It was more than a dream. I knew that it was a word, and I knew that it was his plan. You know, I wish I had welcomed that dream, and I wish I had been more bold and fearless, because I knew that God was calling me into obedience. But you see, I get caught in my head, and then my thoughts become anxious. I didn't see how God was going to create a scenario or a situation where we laid hands on my friend. After all, it would make her uncomfortable. She didn't want to talk about cancer, and after all, I don't think she wanted to talk about God either. But later that afternoon, she and I were sitting together by ourselves, and she looked at me, and I'm quoting, I don't use this, but she said, "Kelly, cancer sucks." And then she burst into tears. I have never in 40 years seen her cry. And this was a cry of pain, it was a cry of fear, and it was a cry of release. And I knew immediately that this is where God was going to pour out his compassion. I told my friend about my vision, and I asked if we could lay hands on her, and we did. It opened a door to talk about and to share the love, the grace, the forgiveness that only Christ can provide. It was an undeniable act of God's mercy, and it was an indisputable call for my obedience. I've had the privilege in these weeks past to see how powerful that moment was. So God requires what James writes about, and that's humility and obedience. And Jesus gives us the good sense and the grace to do both. He changes us, he heals us, and he makes a way when there isn't one. You know, we are in a season of stewardship, and I believe God is leading each one of us to reflect on these truths. As we are thinking about finishing strong, financially supporting the ministries of our church in the coming year, what are we doing when we do this is allowing our church to always have the ability to adapt, to be flexible, to answer the needs where God calls us to go. You know, a few years ago, our church had a next campaign, and we made some improvements. And because of your generosity, what happened during COVID is that we had already bolstered our sound system so that our live stream could be better. We had already done the HVAC improvements and were able to put scrubbers in. They were the kind that you find in critical care units. So this is just another example of God's faithfulness to provide for our needs even when we don't know we have them. So whether you find yourself in a group of college folks, a board meeting of corporate leaders, or even around your breakfast table, I think God is calling us to ask this: how are we going to finish strong? What will you do with what God has given you? Who will you serve? Which master? And how will I steward my gifts and my talents and my resources so that God's kingdom can be furthered? And in Jesus' words, when that's accomplished, it's on earth as it is in heaven. Thanks be to God.